These stories are first-hand accounts shared by Reddit users, detailing unsettling real-life encounters that left lasting impressions. Each narrative provides a chilling glimpse into moments of danger, survival, and eerie coincidences that might make you rethink your surroundings. Disclaimer: these accounts were originally published by Reddit users and are presented as personal experiences. While they are described as true events, their accuracy relies on the original storytellers. The details shared here are intended for awareness and cautionary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. Story 1. A talking crow taught me to fly. I used to look out the rusted iron bars of my window and dream about being a bird. The chain that shackled me to my bed was just long enough to reach the windowsill, and so every night after my father would visit my room I would lie awake and wait for the first rays of light to creep over the horizon, then walk over to my window to listen to the morning's first few notes of birdsong. Their melodies were so beautiful, I knew that they must have been singing about places far away and wonderful, about sailing on the wind through endless blue skies, looking down at the treetops that dotted the land below. Then, one morning as I lay in bed, something impossible happened. I had fallen asleep the night before, and would have missed my morning birdsong but for a tapping on my window. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes and sat up to see a crow sitting outside on the sill, tapping my window with his beak. I crept over to the window and smiled at the bird. "Hello, Mr. Crow," I said. "Hello, little girl," said the crow. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment, not knowing what to say. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I forced myself to speak. "You know how to talk?" I said. "All birds know how to talk," he replied. "It's just that not all humans know how to listen." I pushed my window open a crack until it hit against the bars. The bird cocked its head in curiosity. "Why are you in a cage?" it asked. "I think it's my destiny," I said. "It's always been this way." "You look rather thin," replied the crow. "Would you like something to eat?" My stomach gave a weak growl. "Yes," I said. "That would be wonderful." Without another word the crow took flight. A few minutes later he returned with a small branch of figs. The crow watched me as I greedily devoured the fruit. After I had finished he stared at me for a moment before speaking again. "I didn't know they put people in cages," he said. "Do you think they mistook you for a bird?" "I don't think so, Mr. Crow," I said. We spent the rest of that day talking. The crow told me all about what it was like to fly, how there was no better feeling in the world. He told me about the faraway lands he had visited when he was a young bird and could still make the journey north with the changing of the seasons. Finally, evening came and the crow said that he had to go. The next morning he was back, however, with 2 more branches of figs. I thanked him for his generosity, and we talked another day away. That day he even sang me a song. He didn't have a voice for singing, but I thought his song was beautiful anyway. We passed the entire fall that way, and the bird's visits became the only bright spot in my life. He brought me not only figs, but cherries and walnuts to anything small enough for him to carry. Soon, however, winter came, and with it the frosts that destroyed the figs and cherries that the crow had used to bring me. His gifts became fewer and fewer, and I could tell from his tired voice that he was flying farther and farther away to get them. One morning, when the first snows of winter had fallen, the crow asked me a question. "What would you do to leave this place?" he asked, cocking his head to the side. I thought for a moment, but I wasn't sure how to answer. Finally, I told the truth. "I would do anything to leave this place," I said. "Anything at all." The crow solemnly nodded and said, "The frost isn't the only thing that winter brings." He flapped his wings once and jumped from the windowsill, and I didn't see him for 3 days. I began to fall into a deep depression. Every morning I would still listen to the birdsong, but it sounded forlorn and empty without my friend there to listen with me. The morning after the 3rd day my crow friend returned. It was so beautiful that day. The sun had come out from behind the clouds to melt the snow, one of the last green days before winter came in earnest. As the shadow passed over the valley in which we lived, I first mistook it for a storm cloud, but then I heard the sound. It was loud enough to crack the sky, but it wasn't thunder, it was birds. Thousands upon thousands of them descended on our house. A whirling storm of beating wings and shrieking caws, they crashed into the walls and windows, pecking at them with wild ferocity. The house shook under their assault, and their calls were so loud that I didn't even hear the windows breaking. They were not so loud, however, that I could not hear my father scream. It was over in a matter of minutes, and the key to my shackles slipped under the door. I rushed over and picked it up with trembling hands, sliding it into the metal cuff around my ankle and turning it. The cuff came loose with a heavy click, and for the first time I was free. The key to the door slipped under the jamb as well, and I opened the door to the rest of the house. The place had been all but destroyed. There was splintered wood and broken glass everywhere, and in the center of the living room was what remained of my father, a pile of blood-stained feathers. The birds had all flown off, but Mr. Crow sat on top of the living room fireplace, regarding me with a curious look. "Now you can fly free, little girl," he said. "No more cages for you." "Thank you, Mr. Crow," I said. "Will you come with me?" Mr. Crow shook his head. "I am an old bird," he said, "and my journey is coming to a close. But yours is just beginning." Mr. Crow flapped his wings and took flight, and I never saw him again. As I stepped out of the front door, my bare feet touched the grass for the very first time, and I could smell the flowers on the breeze as it drifted over me. At that moment, though my feet were firmly on the ground, my heart was soaring through the endless blue sky, far above the world that I had left behind. I still wake up every morning to hear the birds sing, and when the first few notes break the silence of the early dawn, I think of Mr. Crow and smile. Story 2. I died for 6 minutes in 2003. Heaven isn't what we think it is. With apologies to the religious, I feel my story must be shared. In 2003, when I was 15 years old, my heart stopped for 6 minutes. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, at the point in my daily routine when I walked home from the bus stop. In the 4 blocks between the corner where I hopped off the bus and my front door, I started to feel nauseous. It came on suddenly, without warning. I felt just fine all day, ate a lunch of Bosco sticks and marinara sauce, something I'd eaten hundreds of times throughout high school. Before I had an opportunity to consider alternative causes, I broke out in a cold sweat. Then I felt the curious flutter in my chest. My heart slipped into what I later learned was an episode of ventricular fibrillation. I became breathless and collapsed. What happened next has been told to me after the fact. I apparently sprawled in the road, where a woman driving a hatchback nearly crushed my skull beneath her tires. Instead, she screeched to a halt, tried to rouse me, then dialed emergency services when she failed to do so. EMS arrived to discover my heart had stopped beating. I was dead, technically. They transported my body to the hospital, and somewhere along the way managed to shock my ticker back to life. Thus began a harrowing weeks-long journey through the American healthcare system that led eventually to an ablation, pacemaker, and mountains of debt my family's still dealing with. But my heart's all right. And thank F***K it is, because what I learned that day has taught me never to thank God for anything. Because for those 6 minutes, as my lifeless body traveled across the city accompanied by 2 paramedics working tirelessly to revive me, my soul transcended our world to visit the hereafter. During my visit, I learned things about our universe that I wish I hadn't. Perhaps in sharing my story, I might help our species prepare for what comes after we expire. It began with light. Blinding, white, pervasive. It bathed me, calmed me. It was everything they told you about. Beatific, welcoming, the stuff of spiritual experiences. I had the distinct feeling of ascent, like the light was lifting me skyward. I passed through several sets of gates, which my dizzied consciousness hardly registered. Upon reflection, I don't believe they were physical in any sense, and yet I recall the feeling of admittance, as if they might have prevented me from rising had they remained closed. In any event, I arrived in a place without dimension, a place beyond reality. It only made sense while I occupied it. I don't believe a corporeal being can make sense of the astral plane. Something about its intangible existence defies translation. So what I came away with were more impressions than images. I was not alone. Several life forces enclosed me upon my arrival. At first, because of my Christian upbringing, I believed them to be angels. In my incorporeal form, I made the spiritually equivalent gesture of opening my arms, anticipating their embrace. Instead, I felt myself shackled by their powers, like a collared dog. Humiliation and terror came over me. These were not the ethereal beings I'd been led to believe await us. These were cruel, unsympathetic overlords by whom I was fettered. I thought, my soul wailing like a petulant child. Something like laughter returned, but it was cold, mocking. Thoughts floated into my consciousness like birds winging in and out of sight. They delivered some horrifying truths about existence that I'll do my best to relay to you now. Our universe, like many others running parallel to it, contains a pittance of the total energy in existence. It is a farm used to produce souls, which only arise in the precise conditions found in our cosmos. When you hear scientists talk about the improbability of the existence of our Goldilocks universe, it's because they don't actually come into being spontaneously. They're designed. And the hands that craft them are not benevolent gods, but rapacious beings with little care for the creatures they create. Our ultimate purpose, I learned in the custody of the spirits that shackled me, was to ripen until we were ready to serve them on their higher plane. The Big Bang gave birth to the universe to give rise to life to eventuate in humanity, a sufficiently conscious organism that may be harvested for use as slaves on a higher plane, where time and space dissolve into an eternity we spend in servitude. Penchant for psychologically distressing manipulation. It batted me around like a cat with a caught mouse, reveling in the pain it produced. Physical discomforts we imagine hell inflicting upon us pale in comparison to the torture of soul pain. Loss of a loved one comes closest, that piercing, emotional damage resulting from trauma. When it became clear my time had not yet expired on Earth and I was to return, I was told not to reveal their existence to the rest of my kind. My reward, they communicated to me, would be a marginally improved station among the slave population. Alternatively, if I managed to convince others of their existence, new horrors would await me when I returned. I can't imagine anything worse than what I experienced, subsumed beneath an ineffable grief and torment. For weeks, I tried to explain to anyone who would listen what I experienced. Everyone told me I'd suffered a very serious and traumatic experience for a young man, that the event left scars on my psyche as well as my heart. I gave up trying to convince them. I slowly began to convince myself that what they'd told me was true. I'd simply imagined it. A death dream, as it were. The mind reckoning with its own imminent demise, trying to make sense of the experience. Then I met someone who claimed to have met God. This was a few years later, when the author of a nonfiction book recounting their near-death experience visited my hometown. I won't reveal the author's name as I don't want to invite a lawsuit, which I'm sure he'd launch against me if he read that I'd besmirched him. I attended a reading and afterward confronted him about his tale. I looked him in the eye and asked if he really met God, something I'm sure he's dealt with hundreds of times. He smiled and nodded, assuring me that yes, God is real and is filled with love. On a lark, I decided to tell him that I knew the truth, that slavery awaits us all. A flicker in his gaze betrayed his knowledge of the fact. He really had died and visited the afterlife, but lied about it in his book. Because he knew. He knew the truth of heaven, the horrible place our souls are bound for. Story 3. The homeless in my neighborhood don't just want change. 2 whole years ago my wife Angie and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. We knew it was anything but a buyer's market, but we were sick of paying triple what a mortgage would be in rent every month. I'm sure this story is familiar to some of you, and we went through every stage of disbelief, anger, and finally apathy after every competitive offer we put together was blown out of the water by a multinational investment corporation. I'm not mad about the process anymore, although it left me questioning where society was headed. How is this legal? I went to school. I paid off debt. I got a good job. I did everything right to still get priced out the fucking city I grew up in. Perhaps some anger remains. But after setting our sights on the city's less desirable neighborhoods, we finally got our home. On June 1st we moved into a 4,500 square foot colonial. It had hardwood floors that patinated like leather, and the frosted plaster trim gave the ceilings the look of a wedding cake. The basement was a different story. It wasn't just unfinished, it was a dank hole in the ground, and scribbled on the walls were strange spirals and crude faces. Kids. The realtor had said like she knew who drew the markings. Fixing up the basement would be quite the value builder. So, sure, the kitchen had composite counters and the basement needed a sign above the entrance that read, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here," but we had a home. And a damn big one at that. The catch was that it was a stone's throw from the freeway and that the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Angie said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market keeps rocketing and move again in a year. There were some flaws in her plan, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust to like it there. The first few weeks went smooth and me and the wife got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbors. Maybe it was the threat of crime and that there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to, but whatever it was, our neighbors were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quick, and while there were some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had the game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. When we passed large turds, one of us would point and we played human or dog. Unfortunately, after just a couple weeks at this game, we became experts at differentiating between these. Gunshots carry the sharp crack of the sound barrier being broken, while fireworks go boom or pop. As for the poop, let's just say that we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to lay landmines around town. There was a homeless problem there for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbors seemed to see right through them. They'd act as if they were ghosts. Like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window above looks out to our backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could only see a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a tall, dark stump. I don't remember a tree there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped and I dropped the bowl where it crashed in the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Angie shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm gonna take the trash out." "Okay." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello." Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. The cops made a point to show up an hour late, if at all. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking towards me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. "What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar appeared across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaven and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in his enormous palm was a pill. "I don't have any drugs," I said. His face didn't change. There was no want or question in his eyes. "You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but still his expression was static. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm. I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. "What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then he widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. But my blood cooled because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. "Please," I murmured. "Please leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he were a giant parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I tried to talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of a driveway. Hey, I started over to them. This may sound a little crazy, but do you know of a tall fella around here that wears a giant coat? They both started laughing. Sorry to waste your time. I turned to go. No. One of them was waving me back. Are you talking about a really big motherfucker? The man raised his hand to signify. Yay hi? Black coat? Nasty scars? Yeah. I nodded. Well, that's Tall Frank. What do you want to know about him? You see him in your recycling. No, why? Tall Frank's a con man. He makes his living that way. I nodded. He was acting weird in my backyard last night. Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self? No. He was staring at me from outside. When I went out, he tried to say something. Or mouth something. Both of their brows rose. You saying that Tall Frank tried to communicate with you? Yeah. They both looked at each other. Tall Frank talks to nobody. And by talks I mean communicating in any kind of way. He cut his own throat to never talk again. The other chimed in. That's just a rumor. Tall Frank showed up in this neighborhood 20 years ago. No one knows where he came from and the man can't tell ya. Yeah, people put all kinds of legends to those scars. Some say it was a dog that bit him. But I have never seen a dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Frank? Well, that's what my mama would call him. He leaned closer to me. She used to tell me to watch my tongue or Tall Frank'll take it. He chuckled to himself. What do you think he wanted with me? They both shrugged. No clue. But you be sure to tell us when you find out. They bent back to their work and I thanked them and went on far less assured than when I'd first set out. The next several days there was no sign of Tall Frank, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that almost took me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Angie was working late recently, and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I saw him again. I was wrapped in a blanket filling the teapot at the sink when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the pot and ran to the back door. Hey! My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of drunken state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered through the backyard over to him. What do you want with me? Tall Frank was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked down at my bare feet, but he was already walking. Hey, just leave us alone. I stepped cautiously after him. When I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. I don't ever want to see you back here again. With our difference in size and the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked at him like some angry hobbit. He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I can't blame him. Tall Frank crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. I'm not fucking sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and paused before pulling out an envelope. Then he put the letter in his other hand and reached in again and pulled out another. What are those? He extended the envelopes to me, his long arm nearly stretched the entire alley. I approached the letters, cautiously snatching them and stepping back. What are these? I muttered, already distracted. They had both been opened, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college-ruled paper. All the ink was smeared like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to my side and stared at Tall Frank in disbelief. Angie had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letterhead read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. The pills. I thought about the empty capsule he'd shown me that I tossed aside. It was my emergency albuterol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations. Angie is trying to kill me? Suddenly I realized tall Frank's arm was around me and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. The things you can learn from people's recycling, I said. Tall Frank nodded and we watched the upstairs light turn on and my wife appeared in the window. She twisted something in her fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later I heard the back door open. "Honey, are you out here?" Angie called. "I made you some tea." I guess the homeless around her don't always want change. Sometimes they might want to save your life. Story 4. I met a demon on the Tokyo subway. This story is a retelling of something that happened to me when I was 7 years old. As the years have gone by and I've grown up, I've realized that the story cannot possibly be true, yet I can't shake the feeling that it is. It happened in Tokyo, in the subway station. I was standing with my father when I saw the demon, a monstrously tall and furry creature with leathery black wings and a snout like an anteater. I must have stared at him for close to 10 minutes before he finally spoke, in a soft mutter that was clearly intended for his ears only. "This human is creeping me out," he said. "It almost looks like it's looking right at me." "I am looking right at you," I said. The demon nearly jumped out of his skin. "You can see me?" he asked. "Yes." "Can't everybody?" "Not unless they're in the 5th dimension." "Am I in the 5th dimension?" I asked. "Your mind must have slipped over here by mistake. What were you thinking about before you saw me?" I thought for a moment and then grinned. "Trains." "Oh, well, trains are the link between our dimensions. I guess your mind must have just wandered over here. Either that or you're going crazy." "I hope I'm not going crazy," I said. "Being crazy is a good thing in the 5th dimension," the demon replied. I laughed. "Do you have subway lines in the 5th dimension?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "How else would we get to work?" "You've got wings." I said. "Yes, but who wants to fly? Taking the train is so much faster, and if I fly to work I'm all sweaty when I get there." "So what do you use your wings for?" I asked. "I put them over my head when it rains." "Can I see?" I asked. "Sure," the demon said. My hair blew back as he swooped his enormous wings over his head. I laughed again. "You're funny," I said. The demon laughed too, but then his expression changed. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You seem sad." Yes, the demon replied, not looking at me but at something behind me. "Say, would you like to see a magic trick?" "Okay." The demon reached up and tugged a big rainbow handkerchief out of his snout. He must have pulled out 20 feet before he ran out. "That's funny." I laughed, but I stopped when I realized I wasn't holding my dad's hand anymore. I looked around and saw the subway station had disappeared, replaced by flowing green meadows that were full of old trains. "I can't see the subway station anymore," I said. "That's okay," said the demon. "Sometimes it's better to see what isn't there instead of what is." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes when I'm bored or sad, my mind slips off to the 3rd dimension, and I see people like you." "That's funny," I laughed. "Can you go to other dimensions too?" But the demon didn't answer, he was looking up at the sky. "It's starting to rain," he said, whooshing his wings up over his head. Warm droplets of rain hit my face. "Can I get under your wings with you?" I asked. "Not now," he replied. "You've got to go home." The world began to shimmer and flow together like different shades of green and golden paint, spinning around faster and faster in circles. I started to feel a little sick and I closed my eyes. The world stopped spinning, but warm droplets of water still fell on my face. I opened my eyes and saw my mom crying over me, but I didn't see my dad. "Where's Dad?" I asked her. "Did he bring me home?" "Yes, darling," she said, although she didn't look at me when she said it. "He brought you home and then he had to go away." "Oh," I replied. "When will he be back?" "I don't know," she said. "My dad never did come back, and it was years before I found out the truth. He had killed himself that day. That morning he had written a note to my mother explaining that he intended to bring me along and step in front of the train with me. My mother found it when she got home from work and called the police, but it was too late to stop my father. The witnesses say that just before he jumped I pulled away from his hand and ran off, fainting right after. But one of the witnesses, a little boy around my age, said that he saw something take my hand and lead me away from the speeding train. He said it was a monstrously tall and furry creature, with leathery black wings and an anteater's snout. Story 5. I work as a waitress at a diner, and I think one of our regulars might be the devil. I work at a rest stop diner in a town where people pass through as quickly as they can on their way to something or someone better. It's called Lucky's, which is a little ironic because if you've ended up here you're anything but. If you stay too long the dust settles. Working at Lucky's you never see the same license plates twice, or faces for that matter. I've lost count of the amount of times the answer to my, "Where are you heading?" has been, "Anywhere but back." The lights flicker more often than not, and the jukebox sometimes spits out songs that aren't on the index cards, but the coffee's hot, and most people who try them say the pancakes are the best they'll ever have, and I'm inclined to agree. The embroidered name tag on my uniform reads Isabella, but that ain't even close to my real name. It was my mom's. Lucky's has been here a long time. I wear it because I like hearing her name said by other people. It's like she's still here, still coming up in conversation. Like she might walk through the door any second and isn't buried in the cemetery just past the strip club. Lucky's is also always open. Boys. Working long shifts serving drifters and truckers and runaways, those who have become impermanent out on the highways, you get to know how to read people pretty quick. When you move around that much, always on the road, you leave parts of yourself behind sometimes, lost between the miles. Sometimes, people are just driving because there's nothing else left to do. Working at Lucky's I've seen all sorts of lost things. I once saw a man hit a deer with his truck and pull over to bury it in the red dirt, digging as the sun went down, tearing a steady flow down his face as he fought the ground to cover up what he had done. I once had a man I recognized from the news leave me a blood-stained $20 as a tip, sad-eyed in a denim jacket that barely hid the gun taped to his ribs. I once saw a one-armed girl no more than 16 stand up on the roof of her car and sing, until a coyote came and sat in front of the hood, howling along. I once saw two women fistfight in the parking lot in the night outside, until one was spitting blood and teeth and then they kissed in the blue lights of the police car that happened to pass them by, faces lit up red and shining. I've seen the highway on fire, lines of flames between tires as the asphalt set itself alight in the heat. I've seen roadside baptisms, preachers pulled up with a van and a kiddie pool. I've seen things walking out in the desert just beyond reach of the neon sign for the motel that don't look quite like people, shifting out in the blue night. I met a woman who showed me a photograph of the place she was buried. I often meet people who you talk with for a while until their faces start to flicker, and can't quite hold up the pretense that long. I've met people who have to be invited inside, before they can cross the threshold. I've met some lovely members of a sacrificial cult who tipped well and were oh so polite, even when they asked me if I'd consider letting them harvest me. But this is a story about, well, you read the title. It was a Friday and I was working a night shift. I prefer nights, because when I drive home I can pretend for a while that I'm going to follow the taillights of the car in front until I leave everything in my rearview mirror, until it gets light and the desert changes to ocean, like if I rolled my windows all the way down I'd taste salt on the air. That, and I'm one of the only waitresses, shall we say qualified, to deal with the night customers. Besides, tips are always better when the moon is out. We only have 3 true regulars in Lucky's, and only 2 have shown so far. Rosemarie, our first and most frequent regular, was sitting by the window in her brown fur coat, always drawn about her shoulders come rain or shine. Not that it ever rained here. Her hair was long and white down her back, like the moon through a glass. She waved over to me, gracing me with a wink that made her crow's feet deepen, all the more beautiful for it. Rosemarie liked whiskey in her tea. Sometimes, she fed cake crumbs to the voodoo dolls she carried in her pockets. She was also a chronic insomniac and liked the company of Lucky's when sleep was hiding from her. She continued to shuffle through the deck of cards she had already set up on the tabletop. I watched her thumbs flipping over 2 jokers. Rosemarie liked to divine the future, when she had the time. She used a frayed pack of hotel playing cards, and if she was in a good mood she'd read your coffee grounds. I didn't ask her too much, because those coffee grounds had a startling way of coming true. Table 6 was empty, and spotless as usual. It was the only table without a salt shaker, and the only one I never placed cutlery on. Only one person ever sat there. Our second regular, Jones, was sitting in his usual booth, dregs of his black coffee held tight between his hands, badge resting on the table. He had his eyes closed, head bent down like he was repenting, steam curling off the lip of the mug and wrapping round his fingers. Jones was my favorite of our customers, not that I'd ever tell him. I walked past the booth and slid a bowl of sugar packets along the tabletop until it hit the mug with a soft clink. He jumped, reaching for his holster out of habit, until his eyes focused and he saw me. He smiled, embarrassed, and it changed his face, dragging him back to life. When he smiled, it was like a storm in a drought, made you want to stand and watch and maybe stay out in it just a while longer. I wanted to put my hands over his where they had resumed their place on the mug, to feel the second-hand heat through his palms. Sometimes I can sense the sadness in people just by the feel of their skin. They carry it around with them, bone deep, trying to hide it from the world. But sometimes you can lift it from them for a minute or two, if you have enough kindness to spare. It doesn't take much, most times. Jones was too young to be that sad. And yet, tired today? I gestured with the coffee pot to his half-empty cup. Everyone knew about the little girl he'd pulled from the dumpsters outside the swimming pool last week. She was the fifth one missing in 3 months. I could tell from the shadows like purple thumbprints beneath his eyes he'd been dreaming about her. She'd been found without her shoes on. He'd carried her to the ambulance in her socks, pink with little daisies on them, small in his arms like she was asleep. Lou the fry cook had cried when I told him that the other day. I really liked Lou. He was almost too big to fit through the service door, and had a tattoo of his dog just below the one of the angel of death on his shoulder. Lou sheds a tear for most things. The dead raccoons we're always finding by the back door with their hands missing. Whenever there's a new missing poster plastered over the cracked glass of the phone booth in the parking lot. Every time he hears I Will Forever Hate Roses when it decides to pop up on the jukebox. Big guy, bigger heart. Always tired, Jones said as I poured. Another girl went missing yesterday. As I poured, I made sure to brush his thumb where it rested on the cup handle with the inside of my wrist, lifting out that sadness as far as I could. He smiled up at me shy, and I smiled back before I could stop myself. I walked on to the next booth, 2 truckers with faces that had seen too much sun. One was showing the other the photos of his new baby in his wallet. He had tobacco-stained teeth, a scab on his cheek and wind-chapped lips, and his smile was the most beautiful damn thing as he talked about his kid, lit up like Christmas morning. He showed me too as I refilled his coffee, and I stayed and talked to them for a while. The other trucker, with gold-back teeth, told me how he'd used to drive pigs, but couldn't handle the guilt when he handed them over to the slaughterhouse. Said he'd look right into their pink faces through the slats and their eyes looked right back, bright and pleading like they knew what he'd done. Said he still dreamt about them. Now he drove freezers of seafood, specialty deliveries for fancy hotels. He'd never seen the ocean. Lou slammed the bell from the depths of the kitchen and I got back to work, taking orders from a woman with a Labrador who ordered hot dogs for them both, and 3 teenage boys in their blood-stained varsity jackets in the corner, who had $10 between them and asked for as many waffles as they could get. They often came in on full moons, leaving their bikes chained up in the parking lot. They were always hunting for something with their baseball bats, backpacks filled with bullets and their daddy's guns, but they were nice kids so I always gave them extra scoops of ice cream. Besides, I knew they needed the energy because when they were hunting they had to run fast. Real fast. There used to be 4 of them. I cleared the table from the 2 women at the next booth on my way back. They looked to be twins, both dressed in long silk skirts and hiking boots, red hair piled up messy on top of their heads. Neither acknowledged me, not out of rudeness but because they were too preoccupied, packing up their bags, overspilling with maps and notebooks. I spied a roll of duct tape and a bottle of vodka in there too, along with some stakes and crucifixes. They were deep in conversation, waving their hands, and I caught a little of it as I stacked their empty glasses, lipsticked round the rims. I know where I buried him, Sylvia Dash. You don't know Jack's hit. We dug for hours and dash. My mom always taught me eavesdropping was rude, so I left them to it and headed into the kitchen. But I got the sense that wherever they had left, whoever he was, he certainly wasn't there anymore. I felt like telling them, but like my mom said, it's not polite to listen to other people's conversations. You never know what you'll wish you hadn't heard. Lou was dancing to the radio, swaying his hips to Sugar Hill as Dolly sang down the wires. He waved at me with the spatula he was using as a microphone. Carlos handed me a plate of pancakes. Carlos had worked here so long he'd known my mom, and was the only one who knew my real name. He sometimes came with me on the weekends to change the flowers on her grave. He always brought her desert flowers, growing from the same earth she was. Carlos was also the only one who knew the recipe for Lucky's pancakes, and the only one that could cook them right. On days when he wasn't working, we had no pancakes. Simple as. That was just the way it went. I'd learnt that the hard way, but that's another story. Along with the pancakes came a warning. He's back. He gestured through the doors. Table 6. Our final regular had shown. It had been a while since he'd been around. I hadn't even seen him come in, but that wasn't unusual. He moved in mysterious ways. I raised an eyebrow. Shit. Carlos raised one back. Oh shit. He tossed me the salt with a grimace, and I filled the pockets of my apron. Lou banged around in one of the staff lockers for a moment, until he emerged triumphant, waving a Bible that had definitely seen better days. He placed it on the counter next to the syrup jugs and flipped to a random page. We leant over his huge shoulders to read what it said. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. Lou shrugged and patted me on the shoulder. I don't get paid enough for this shit. I took the pancakes to table 6, which had been empty the last time I'd looked. It was now very much occupied. The man sitting at table 6 was smiling as I walked over. If you could call it a smile. It was more like rictus, lips straining deep red at the corners of his face. His eyes kept darting from side to side, too fast to count, like his pupils couldn't make up their mind where they should be. His hands shook as I got closer, hovering like flies on a carcass. I tried to lean as far away from him as I could as I placed the plate on the tabletop, but as I pulled my hands away, he darted his neck out fast, whipping his head up and tilting his face towards me. He sniffed in, hard, eyelids fluttering. He giggled, shrill like it was stuck on the roof of his mouth. I recoiled, trying to hide the urge I had to run back to the kitchen. There's something about hearing a grown man giggle that makes the skin crawl. Can I get you anything? I asked, faking bright. I'd take your name. He gripped one of the pancakes in his fist, turning it to mush. I tapped the name tag on my uniform. He shook his head, grinning, shoulders almost vibrating with this strange fluid roll as his smile slipped for a second, front teeth jutting suddenly, tongue sharply poking out. Filth was caked under his nails, red like the dirt on the sides of the road. Then he was smiling again, swaying slowly from side to side, feral, in his hunting jacket. His hair hung in greasy strings around his ears, like blonde rat tails, and they swung with him back and forth. Isabella, Isabella, Isabella. It doesn't suit. He suddenly slammed his hand up to his face, shoveling the crushed pancake into the gaping hole of his wide mouth. I jerked back. The movement was so sudden. I shoved my hands into my apron, reaching for the salt, and his eyes narrowed. There's no need for that, came a voice from behind me. It rolled across my shoulders, deep, to the bone. Mr. Prince. I turned to face our third regular, relief mixing with fear in a swirling pit in my chest. Kinda like that feeling you get at a fairground in midsummer, when you've been on a carousel too long, and part of you knows you need to get off, but the other part doesn't want to leave because you know as soon as you stand still you're going to be sick. Mr. Prince had that effect on people. Mr. Prince was dressed, as always, in his black pinstripe. His Stetson was darker than the night outside, and his boots shone like they were wet. If you didn't notice the upside-down crucifixes embroidered daintily onto his custom lapels, you'd think he was just a man with money, maybe mixed up in something a little shady, like oil or pharmaceuticals. He was handsome by the way of his jaw, with his bone-white smile, but his black sunglasses were balanced on the bridge of his nose, silver-rimmed and gleaming, hiding his eyes as usual. When he spoke it was a drawl, dragged up from the depths of the South. I'm sorry for my acquaintance. He's a little Mr. Prince glanced at the man sitting at table 6 as he panted with his tongue hung out, like a dog. Overexcited. Mr. Prince sat down and the lights above the booth flickered. He tilted his hat back on his head and the jukebox coughed and skipped, and suddenly Robert Johnson was on and singing about that damn crossroad again. Mr. Prince popped a Marlboro Red between his teeth and pushed the window open a sliver with the knuckles of his left hand. The silver pentagram ring on his wedding finger clacked against the glass. Mr. Prince smiled, the way snakes do when they're watching you from the grass on their bellies. The cigarette was now smoking between his teeth, although he hadn't moved. Besides, Leroy ain't the type for salt. He's just a man. He looked him up and down and his top lip curled. Barely. He turned to Leroy. I see you started on my pancakes. But what's the point of good food if it ain't for sharing? Leroy giggled that strange high sound that made me want to run, and shook a little. Everything about Leroy made me nervous, fight or flight getting ready to flood my system. Mr. Prince handed Leroy a menu. Order whatever you want. He leant forward and the lights flickered. Leroy ordered 4 cheeseburgers and a glass of milk. Well, if that's all. I managed. I could feel Leroy's eyes clinging to my back as I left. Rosemarie waved me over before I could get back to the safety of the kitchen. I wouldn't worry about him, darling. She crossed herself and tapped the card on top of the pile. The Jack of Spades. It had its eyes scratched out. But not by Rosemarie. It looked like it had been printed that way for years. We won't be seeing him again. She wasn't talking about Mr. Prince. She cupped my cheek and I leant into it, her hand rough with age, but warm. I could tell she thought I looked tired. She paid for her tea and toast, and walked out into the warm night waiting outside the doors. I finally made it back into the kitchen and was immediately attacked. Cold water doused me in the face and I threw up my arms on instinct, trying to protect my hair. Lou aggressively squirted me in the face with the spray bottle we also kept in the staff locker, the kind you use for tending houseplants. Ours was filled with holy water. Lou, Jesus fucking Christ, get off I'm dash, I sputtered, and he sprayed me again. I spat holy water out, dripping down the front of my dress and wiped it from my eyes, makeup running a little. I grabbed the bottle from his hands. I think I'm good. I wasn't really mad though, better safe than sorry, especially when it comes to possession. Sorry. Just check. Lou sheepishly handed me a dish towel. Already did me and Carlos. He looked down at his shoes, awkward. He was a foot taller than me and a decade older, and I hid my smile because he was twisting the toe of his boot back and forth like a little kid being kept after class. Carlos kept his eyes firmly fixed on his hands as he started flipping patties, but I could sense him holding back a laugh, desperately clenching his teeth. I narrowed my eyes and aimed the spray bottle at him. Maybe you need some more, I threatened. Lou snorted and then Carlos was laughing and I was too, and that heavy feeling that had hovered over us since Mr. Prince had walked in lifted. Sometimes when things get too dark, all you can do is laugh. Mom always said that when shit gets rough, you can either choose to laugh or cry. I never saw my mother cry. It was coming up at 3 in the morning as I took the burgers back to table 6. Leroy visibly drooled and clapped his hands as I walked over. I put the plate in front of him as quickly as I could, but as I pulled back, his head darted forward and he licked the inside of my wrist. His tongue was long and wet against my pulse. I recoiled like I'd been bitten and he laughed, shrill and manic. You taste better than they will, he said, grinning and gesturing to the burgers. Mr. Prince watched this unfold, calm and unreadable like the sky before summer lighting burns down a tree. I frantically wiped my arm on my apron, but I could still feel that tongue on my skin as if I'd left my hand in his mouth. I fought off the tears that suddenly burned at the corners of my eyes, because something told me Leroy would enjoy them just a little too much. I shuddered and cleared Mr. Prince's plate. Tell Carlos the pancakes were good as hell, he said, from behind his sunglasses. Then he chuckled, low and raspy, as if something he'd said was funny. He popped another Marlboro between his teeth and it started to glow, as Leroy shoveled meat down his throat. I tried not to gag as I watched it clog beneath his long nails. I walked by Jones on my way back. He waved me over, eyes creased with worry. He ran a hand over his face, as if he was trying to wipe all the bad things away. Is he both there and you? He gestured over to Leroy, who was rocking back and forth drinking his milk. Jones suddenly looked so tired, uniform creased as his face, looking 50 instead of his 22. Nothing I can't handle. I shook my head and thought about Rosemary. We won't be seeing him again. It felt like hours waiting for Leroy to finish. I took the order of a man with a butterfly tattooed on his neck, and some truckers pouring Jim Beam into their coffee. They asked me for an extra cup, which they placed at the empty seat on their table. For absent friends, they said. I cleaned down the countertop, restocked the sugar packets, and took out the trash, ignoring the man in the rabbit mask that often waits out by the dumpsters. As long as you don't look at him, he doesn't bother you. I refilled coffee cups, and took the orders of the large group of biker girls that came in, leather-clad and road-weary. At 3:03 a.m., Mr. Prince stood. Leroy had licked his plate clean and was sitting still, staring up at him with his teeth bared in a smile, hands gripping the tabletop so hard his knuckles were going white as milk. Mr. Prince handed me a roll of bills wrapped in black plastic that I knew better than to count. He dipped his hat. See, Leroy, we all gotta pay eventually, he said. He leaned in and spoke softly. For I will not acquit the wicked, he smiled. He held out his hand to Leroy, palm flat, waiting. Leroy's hands shook as he reached into his hunting jacket and pulled out a pair of shoes. A child's shoes, small enough that both could fit in one hand. Little pink sneakers, dirty, with brown stains on the toes that I knew could only be one thing. Mr. Prince considered them a moment, under the lights, and shook his head. He seemed like he was sorry before he handed them to me. For your man over there. Tell him to dig deeper where they looked last. He nodded to Jones, who was watching us, his badge gripped in his hand. But Jones knew better than to come over. Mr. Prince turned to Leroy and grinned around his cigarette. We've got a ways to go, the road we're talking. They say it's paved with good intentions. He chuckled and I felt sick to my stomach. He took Leroy's hand, like a child, and they walked out into the night, warm and waiting. The doors swung shut behind them, even though nobody had touched them. The jukebox sputtered, and Chris Ray was on, singing about that road again. I placed the shoes on the table by Jones' empty coffee cup and passed on the message. He sat still for a long time after, just watching them on the tabletop, trying not to cry or scream or punch a hole in the plaster. All I could do was refill his coffee, because when someone is trying to hold themselves together like that, there's nothing left to say. My shift ended, and I drove myself home, following the taillights in front of me. I knew when I woke up it would be dark and it would be time for my next shift, but for now I just drove, dreaming about the ocean and watching the sun come up, like it always does, despite everything. Story 6. Under the back porch. As a kid I lived with neglectful parents at best. At worst Dad would turn his screams and fists on me, but I learned quickly how to dodge the worst of it. Mom wasn't much help, she'd just smoke in the kitchen and bitch at him for staying out so late. At the time we lived basically in the middle of nowhere, our nearest neighbors were a long walk away for a 6-year-old, and we had trees between us. No one to run to for help. But I was pretty small for a kid my age. I learned I could fit pretty much anywhere. The closet. Dryer. I think even once I tucked myself under my futon in such a way I could still get some air but no one could see me. I was a master at hiding. But it wasn't for a good reason. One night I chose to do something different. I could hear it in Dad's yells. He was pissed and was about to get violent. Mom wasn't helping either, just piling fuel onto an inferno of a flame. So I knew I had to find a good hiding spot. I'd gotten the idea a few days before, when I realized the lattice covering the bottom half of the back porch had a hole in it. Not big enough to fit a full-grown man, most likely, but it could fit a skinny 6-year-old no problem. So wrapping myself up in my blanket and grabbing my hippo stuffy, I snuck out my window and ran into the backyard. In the middle of autumn. When it was 40 degrees out and the temperature was steadily dropping. I crawled under the porch, scraping my elbows and getting splinters in my palms, but I fit inside. It was actually quite spacious compared to most of my hiding spots. I couldn't sit up all the way, but I had plenty of room to spread out my limbs. Of course, I was also getting covered in dirt. It had rained a few days ago, so the mud was still a little wet. I wrapped myself in my blankie the best I could and settled in for the night. But soon, even with my blankie and my hippo, my teeth were chattering so hard I could barely breathe. I didn't want to go back inside though, knowing if my dad caught me I'd be in for the whipping of my life. So I had to tough it out. "Honey, are you cold?" That voice was not the voice of my mother, scratchy from all the smoking and screeching she did. It was sweet, like honey. I turned over to see the dim outline of a woman lying on her stomach next to me. She had a pretty butterfly necklace and was just as dirty as I was. I nodded, not wondering how she'd been down there without me noticing. The woman's belly crawled forward and wrapped her arms around me, and suddenly I became warm, like I was sitting next to a campfire. I snuggled into her arms, not minding the mud. After all, we were both dirty. "You've gotten so big," the woman said, examining my face. "How old are you now, Alex?" 6. How did I know this woman again? I didn't think I did. 6. The woman gasped. "You're all grown up then. I'm so happy." She sighed pleasantly and stroked my hair. I'd never felt so cozy in my life. "What's your name?" I asked. She smiled, I could hear it in her voice. "I'm Lily. What's your favorite thing to do?" I had to think for a second. "I like board games. And coloring." Lily chuckled. "Just like me then. Could never get enough of Scrabble. But I guess you're still too young to play that, huh?" I nodded. "Lots of words. I want to play it though. I like the tiles. Would you play with me?" I heard Lily sharply inhale. "I don't think I can. Your daddy put me under here and I can't leave, but," she thought for a second. "Alex, could you do me a favor?" Of course. This lady was oh so nice. Why wouldn't I do her a favor? "When you wake up in the morning, go to the police station. Ask for an officer by the name of Lowell Joyce. Tell him where to find Lily, okay? Under your back porch. He'll come and he'll get me, okay? And then maybe we can play Scrabble." Yippee! I was too excited about the possibility of playing Scrabble to notice how Lily's voice caught at the end. I nodded vigorously. "I'll do it. We can be on the same team, right?" Lily softly laughed. "I'll help you understand the rules. Good night, Alex." When I woke up the next morning, I heard Lily's voice. "Go now. Your dad's gone to work. I'll tell you how to get to the station." Rubbing my eyes, I crawled out from under the porch and went into the house to grab my shoes and a coat. I shivered in the frosty cold. But I thought Lily was right behind me. After my shoes and coat were on, I started walking. It was long enough to get to the neighbor's house. I really can't remember how long it took to get to the police station, although I have no idea why no one pulled over to see what the hell a 6-year-old in dirty pajamas was doing walking alongside the road. Lily kept guiding me onward. "Wait, okay, cross the street now. Turn right here. Keep going. You've almost made it." I nearly collapsed with exhaustion by the time I walked into the station. The guys out front chatting and having a good time didn't see me until I almost made it to the front desk. "Whoa. You okay?" One of the officers knelt down to my level, eyes wide. I nodded. "I'm okay. Can I speak to Lowell Joyce?" I asked. One of the other officers picked me up. "Sure, kid, sure. Let's just get you someplace warm. Holy shit, your lips are blue." I remembered quietly scolding the man about watching his language. Shit was a bad word. I was given some warm cocoa and wrapped up in a blanket by the time an old man with a graying mustache sat by me. "Hey kid, I'm Sheriff Joyce. What's your name?" he asked. "Alex." I set down my cup and looked him straight in the eye. "I was told to tell you that Lily is under the back porch. You need to go let her out so we can play Scrabble." I had never seen a grown man turn pale before. Lots of things blurred together at this point. I remember being taken back to my house and there were a lot of police cars and people around. The back porch was surrounded by yellow tape, and someone was taking a black bag away while my dad was in handcuffs. After that, I lived with my grandparents, Sheriff Joyce and his wife. I tried to ask about what happened and who was Lily, but I always got shut down. I was too young to know. But life got better. A lot better. Grandpa was the best man I could have hoped for in my life. We went out on weekends to the movies where he let me have the giant soda even though I'd have to pee in the middle of the movie. When I asked if I could drink when I was 13, he let me try a beer. I spat it out and didn't touch it again. He never judged me for my love of art, letting me paint my own bedroom multiple times over the years. I felt safe around him. He never laid a hand on me. My grandmother was amazing too. Over the week she'd homeschool me along with teaching me things that you wouldn't learn in a school, such as how to respect others but not take their crap. And cooking. Lots of cooking. I could make my own birthday cake by the time I was 12. But I usually just made them for my friends. I got a lot of those after I was free from my dad. When I turned 16, Grandpa took me back to my dad's house. The whole thing had been bulldozed over. But I could still see the yellow tape wound around a few trees, faded and torn. We sat together on the back of his truck. He opened a beer and drank half of it before setting it down and grabbing me an orange soda. After I drank it, he told me, "Lily was your mother." Good thing he didn't tell me as I was swallowing. I likely would have had it coming out of my nose. "My mom?" I questioned, confused. "Your actual mom. The woman who lived with your dad was not your mother." My granddad grabbed another beer. "Lily was my daughter. I loved her so much, but when you were around 6 months old, she vanished." My stomach dropped. "My dad just imprisoned her under the porch?" I asked, starting to feel sick. Grandpa took a deep breath before setting his unopened beer down. "That's something I've never been able to understand. Lily told you to find me? And that she loved Scrabble?" "Yeah. She kept me warm that night. I probably would have frozen to death if she hadn't been there. I was a stupid kid even though I knew that." Grandpa went dead quiet before he opened that beer and slammed the whole thing. "Alex, Lily had been dead the whole time she was gone. When we dug her up, she was bones. Experts confirmed it, and your dad confessed to what happened. They'd gotten into a fight and he threw her down the stairs. He broke her neck." He clenched his fists. "I knew he had something to do with her disappearance, but I never had proof until you walked into my station, covered in dirt and telling me she was under the porch." I was floored. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was shake my head. "But I saw her. She was alive. She had this butterfly necklace." I trailed off when Grandpa pulled an evidence baggie from his pocket. There was that butterfly necklace all right. Rusty, and parts of the paint had chipped off, but I remembered it as clearly as I remembered Lily's voice. Grandpa took a shaky breath as he pressed the bag into my hands. "Lily loved you so much. It's why she stuck around that bastard. You were her whole world. She was constantly taking pictures and sending them to us in the mail. Sometimes a mother's love can accomplish things that no human can do." My eyes overflowed with tears as I clutched the necklace to my chest. Choking on sobs, I leaned against Grandpa. He held me tight and I swear I felt a few of his tears land on the top of my head. And for just a brief moment, I swear I felt that warm love I felt that night under the porch. Story 7. I can see people's auras, and it's a curse. Yes, I can see people's auras. And I hate saying it so bluntly. It makes me sound like some hack psychic who fakes the ability as a means of exploitation and a paycheck. I've never made money from my ability. I've never taken advantage of it. And until now, I've never spoken of it to anybody. But I really do see them, and I'm starting to view it as more of a curse. I have a reason for typing this out, and I assure you, there isn't a happy ending. For me, it's quite simple. I see a faint light surrounding people. Everyone. And in that light I can see their morality. The brighter and more translucent the light is, the better the person. The darker and opaque, the worse. Dim and partly translucent are morally ambiguous. To simplify things, those are the 3 ways I describe them. Dark equals evil. Bright equals good. Dim equals somewhere in between. It's strange, I've always viewed the people with gray/dim auras as arbiters. Mediators. The people in between, who aren't one or the other, and will always have difficult decisions to make. I was a child when I first became aware of my gift. It didn't take long to figure out that the brighter auras were kinder to me and selfless. While both of my parents are good people, my father's aura was quite a bit brighter than my mother's. As a result, he was always far more patient and understanding with me. It was clear to see that my teachers and fellow students with brighter auras were usually friendlier and more compassionate. The dark auras were the stereotypical fighters, lunch money stealers, and bullies. I would say I was around 8 years old when I fully figured out that I have a gift that most people don't have. That possibly nobody else has. I've read some of the New Age websites and alternative medicine articles that give their take on aura reading. While I believe that the vast majority of it is bullshit, I expect there must be at least some other people out there with my ability. So I don't want to completely dismiss those people as an outright hoax. It's just that, for me, it doesn't work anything like the way those websites describe. I've visited numerous aura readers and psychics. Most of them have dim or dark auras themselves, and I'm certain they don't really hold this power. I'm not saying all psychics are terrible people. I've visited a few who had very bright auras. They were unable to convince me that they really have psychic powers, but they at the very least used their deception to try and help people. You need to understand. I'm going to end this entry by sharing a terrifying event that is happening to me. But before I get to that, I think there are a few more things I need to explain. I imagine many of you are curious as to what type of aura is the most common. I'm happy to tell you that the majority of people are somewhere between dim and bright. I see very few dark auras. This isn't scientific, and I haven't traveled the world plotting out charts and graphs, but I'd estimate around 60% of people are brightish. Around 25% dimish, leaving just around 15% darkish. Again, these are just estimates. What's the precise difference between, say, bright and dim? I have no idea. But rest assured, there is far more bright in the world than dark. The next thing I'd like to discuss is children. I can see a person's aura right from birth, and I've never encountered an aura changing as someone ages. I'm not sure what this means for the whole nature versus nurture debate. And I'm not saying that everyone with a dark aura always behaves terribly, or vice versa. A person with a bright aura might be born in horrible conditions, acquire a drug problem, and then resort to thievery to feed their addiction. I think the difference is this: a bright aura thief with a horrible upbringing may rob someone, but they would never intentionally hurt someone in the process. A dark aura thief would kill someone if they could get away with it without even a second thought. Another interesting note: I find the ratio between bright/dim/dark to be similar across pretty much all human activities. Whether I'm at a church or a death metal concert, it always seems to be around that same 60%-25%-15% ratio. I once visited a federal prison and was shocked to see that at least half of the prisoners had bright auras. I had to be at the prison in person to see this because I can't see auras in photographs, television shows, movies, or even in mirrors. I can only see auras in the real world. Another strange thing: I can't even see my own aura. I assume and hope I would be on the brighter spectrum, but I can't see it. The brightest person I ever saw worked as a social worker. She shone so bright that it was difficult for me to even look at her. Based on the way people acted in her presence, I think that almost everyone around her could sense her brightness in a subconscious way. Everyone loved her. She had donated a kidney to someone she barely even knew. She had a special needs adopted child. Most of the money she earned was donated to various charities. And that's only the little that I knew of her. This woman shined so brightly that she scared me. It was scary that someone could be so good, but it wasn't nearly as scary as the darkest person I ever saw. I was 20 years old at the time, leaving a club downtown at 2 a.m. A man quietly walked down the street. I didn't see him at first, but I noticed the light dimming around me. This man was so dark that he partly absorbed the light around him. I looked at him long and hard. He looked desperate, cruel, and callous. When he looked up and locked eyes with me, it made me fall back. He smirked as though he knew what I could see. I saw his face up close. I will never forget it. And I recognized it when I saw his mugshot a few weeks later in the newspaper. He had murdered his ex-wife and 2 children in cold blood. I think I need to get to it now. The reason why I'm writing this out. I fell in love a year ago. She didn't shine anywhere near as bright as what I've seen before, but she most assuredly wasn't dark or even dim. She was beautiful. Her sense of humor, her wit, her everything. She was my dream woman. And I've never told her anything at all about the auras I see. I could go into far more about her, but this isn't a love story. What's important is this: we fell in love. She got pregnant. We got married. We were happy. We were so happy. I remember hearing the buzz of my phone 2 mornings ago. I remember my excitement when I saw, it's happening. Come to the hospital. I remember my frustration when I got stuck in traffic. I remember how long it took to find a parking spot. I remember shouting at a nurse, "What room is my wife in?" I remember bursting through a door and seeing the smile on my wife's face. I remember seeing the doctor, his light shining so bright, as he told me, "Congratulations, it's a boy." The doctor held him up to me. And all the light in the room dissipated. "No, this can't be." I remember saying. The doctor put him in my arms. The darkness around my son was so absolute that I could barely even see him. He was a void. He was so dark that the world barely even existed around him. It was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I started weeping. I think my wife and the doctor thought they were tears of joy. But they weren't. Lord knows they weren't. I think back to the dark outline around that man that murdered his family. It was up to that point the darkest I'd ever seen. But the darkness around my son was 100 times worse. 1,000 times worse. And what could possibly be 1,000 times worse than murdering your entire family? It's been 2 days. We're home now. My son's darkness is so extreme that it dims the hallway leading to his room. My wife knows something is wrong. I think she suspects I'm having regrets about having children at all. If only she knew. What do I do? He's my son. Just 20 minutes ago I stood above him, holding a pillow over his face. But I couldn't do it. Not yet anyway. A man who could murder his 2-day-old baby boy, what color would his aura be? And here's the thought that keeps going through my mind as I sit here alone. The fathers of our worst. The Adolf Hitlers. Joseph Stalins. Timothy McVeighs. If their fathers knew what they would become, would they murder them in the cradle? Would they have the strength to hold down the pillow as long as it takes? I can see the door of my son's room from my office. The hallway seems to be growing darker. I look down at my hands as I type this. Maybe I'm going crazy, but there seems to be an aura around my hands and arms now. It's gray. It's dim. Maybe it's always been dim. I'm looking down at the pillow beside me. The grayish dim outline around my hands is more apparent than ever. Maybe it's time. Maybe this is why I have this gift. It all comes down to right now. Maybe it's time. I think it's time. Story 8. The James Webb Telescope discovered something terrifying in deep space. I work for NASA as an astronomer, and there are certain things we keep hidden from the public. No, the Earth isn't flat, and aliens don't control the government. Fuck, I wish those were the case, as the truth is much, much worse. In 1993, the Hubble Space Telescope saw a star disappear. It didn't go supernova or die naturally, it simply went dark over the span of a few minutes. This star was already too faint to see with the naked eye, and ground-based telescopes had trouble picking it out from among the surrounding stars, so the event wasn't widely known to the public. At the time, we thought the most likely explanation was that a cloud of interstellar dust had drifted between Earth and the star, occluding it from view. It was noted and mostly forgotten about. In 2007, 2 more stars vanished. Due to the circumstances of this event, this was much more concerning. The 2 stars in question were part of a binary system, orbiting each other at a fairly close distance. If a cloud of interstellar dust was the culprit again, they would have both seemed to disappear simultaneously or very close to it. Instead, both stars faded individually over a period of minutes, separated by a span of about 8 hours. This binary system was also about 15 light-years closer to Earth than the star that had previously disappeared in 1993. After carefully reviewing millions of Hubble images, 2 more stars were identified which had gone out in the years 1995 and 2002. These were all in the same stellar neighborhood, only a handful of light-years from each other. The only conclusion we could draw was that some unknown influence, traveling close to the speed of light, was shrouding or destroying these stars. Unfortunately, Hubble wasn't sensitive enough to tell us any more than that. The James Webb Space Telescope first came online a few months ago. Although official channels will tell you that it's still undergoing testing, we have been actively collecting data since early February. One of the first things we did was to aim the telescope at the regions of space occupied by the vanished stars. If they were being blocked by dust clouds, a hope some of us still held on to, the increased sensitivity of the JWST may have been able to see through them and confirm that the stars were still there. Unfortunately, we had no such luck. The first 3 stars that had disappeared were still completely dark. Gravitational wave detectors, though, soon found something odd. In all cases, not only were the stellar masses still present, but the amount of mass had actually increased. More sensitive observations had also detected a type of string, or web, stretching through space connecting these now invisible stars. When we trained the telescope on the binary system that had vanished in 2007, which was the nearest point at which this phenomenon had so far been observed, there was finally enough ambient EM spectrum radiation left to try a mass spectrometer reading. If you're not aware, mass spectrometry is an incredibly useful process, where by measuring the patterns of light wavelengths emitted or reflected by an object, we can learn tons of useful information, such as its temperature, speed and direction of movement, and chemical composition. The readings we got from the binary stars didn't make any sense, though. First of all, they were cold, almost as cold as the surrounding interstellar medium. Whatever had happened to these stars had snuffed them out completely, or somehow prevented their light from escaping. What was truly puzzling, however, were the emission lines returned by the mass spectrometer. Several familiar elements, such as hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium were identified, but these were few and far between. Most of the readings didn't correspond to any known chemical elements, and even seemed to defy what we knew about the physics of light, matter, and chemistry. This massive, star-spanning structure was primarily composed of materials that we didn't even have names for, and may not even have been matter as we understand it. Speculation ran rampant. Obviously, such a thing couldn't be a natural phenomenon. Finally, we had proof of extraterrestrial life. But what was this thing we had discovered, and for what purpose was it being built? The leading hypothesis was that we were looking at a series of Dyson shells, massive solar collectors built to completely envelop stars, in order to capture 100% of their energy output. Such a concept had been envisioned in the early 20th century, as a potential source of energy for an interstellar civilization. Ever since then, the idea had found its way into popular science fiction. The construction of these massive structures had actually been theorized to be one of the first signs of intelligent extraterrestrial life that we may someday detect. It seemed that day was today. The theory still didn't explain everything. First of all, there was the impossible speed with which the stars were covered. Constructing a Dyson shell from scratch in a matter of minutes was beyond even the wildest speculations of scientists and sci-fi writers. Then there were the mysterious filaments that connected the shells over distances of light years. No one had any idea what purpose these could serve, or how they could even be built. Everyone at NASA was fascinated by this mystery. In hindsight, we may have been better off if we had never discovered the truth. Less than a month ago, the JWST detected a series of unusual energy bursts emanating from interstellar space. These were occurring at the very edge of a star system approximately 12 light-years from the binary system that vanished in 2007. As we focused the telescope on this system, we soon determined that these were not natural phenomena either. The energy signatures, which were still flashing intermittently, matched what would be expected from thermonuclear and antimatter-based explosions, along with several other types of energies that we couldn't identify. These explosions, although still not visible to the naked eye on Earth from that distance, were absolutely tremendous in magnitude, easily billions of times more powerful than any nuke that humanity could conceivably build. After experimenting with the telescope settings, we were able to get a clearer picture of what was going on. The tip of one of the interstellar filaments that linked the Dyson system was passing through the Oort cloud of the distant star system, approaching its sun. And whoever lived there was fighting back. Their weapons were able to slow the thing's advance, shattering, breaking off, and vaporizing planet-sized chunks of the object, but it seemed to be rebuilding itself almost as fast as it was being destroyed. After less than a week, the explosions stopped. It seems that they had run out of ammunition. In the void between stars, we knew that these things traveled at nearly the speed of light, But as we watched it approach the inner star system, its pace slowed as it swelled in size, preparing to devour the system star. We quickly trained the telescope's mirrors on the doomed sun. We were about to watch whatever this thing was blotting out another star, but in real time. We all held our breath as we watched the projected image of the main sequence star, slightly larger than our own sun. At first, nothing seemed to be happening, but soon a small shadow appeared on the edge of the luminous orb, soon followed by another shadow, and then a third. The shadows began to converge, forming a strange yet somehow familiar pattern as they blocked out the star's light. "What are those?" one of my colleagues gasped. "They almost look like—" She paused, as if afraid to say the next word for fear of ridicule. I, however, had no such hesitancy. "Leaves," I said, my voice monotone. The situation was far too incredible to express any emotional reaction, even that of pure shock. "They look like leaves." We watched as, over a period of minutes, a web of shadowy outlines, matching the familiar shapes of oblong leaves and thin vines, proceeded to blot out the remaining light from the distant star. By that point, everyone in the room had realized the truth. The phenomenon we had been tracking for so many years wasn't some hyper-advanced alien megastructure. Hydrogen, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and magnesium, some of the few familiar elements we had detected, they were all components of chlorophyll. It was a plant, an enormous plant that spanned across light years. And much like terrestrial plants, it sought out light to fuel itself. The filaments connecting the stars across interstellar space were stems, branches. It would grow in the direction of the nearest stars it sensed, completely enveloping them and then moving on. Any life inhabiting planets orbiting those stars would be left to freeze to death, or perhaps even worse, it was possible that the plant would devour those planets to add to its mass as well. Everyone was silent as the telescope continued to gather data. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, a young astronomer spoke up from the far end of the room, addressing our supervisor. "Sir, we've begun to detect the formation of another tendril, leaving the system. Its vector is—" He gulped. He didn't need to say any more, but he did anyway. "It's heading directly for our sun." "How much time do we have?" the supervisor replied grimly. "Judging by the time lag, distance, relativistic properties, and previously observed speeds of this thing, I'd estimate no more than 27 years, sir." 27 years. We had just watched this galactic we'd overwhelm a civilization that was, at the very least, thousands of years ahead of us technologically, and we had less than 3 decades. I'll probably be found and silenced for posting this. But I don't care. I have to tell someone. I can't keep this a secret any longer. When the sun turns black and the world begins to freeze, at least you'll have some idea of what's going on, small comfort it may be. Story, mine. Every month a parade would pass through my hometown, but we were never allowed to look at it. I've lived in Arizona for the past 15 years of my life, but I had a very different life before that. I used to live in a small town, in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't even tell you what side of the country it's on, or if it even is in the United States. It was a small forest town with dense trees in all directions, but where exactly this particular forest is, well, your guess is as good as mine. The only thing I know for certain is the name of the town, Point Pine. I lived in Point Pine for the first 10 years of my life, before we moved the summer after my 10th birthday. Once we left, my parents never spoke of it again. In fact, they acted as if it never even existed, and to them, I guess it didn't. I don't really blame them either. I caught on pretty quickly and realized that they were trying their hardest to forget the memory of Point Pine. Whenever kids at school asked me where I was from, I simply told them I was from a small town that they had never heard of. I also learned early on that any questions about Point Pine would be met with punishments. A few months after we moved to Arizona, my older sister Felicity had a school project about family history. She did it in our life in Point Pine and wrote about some of the things she remembered from there. Our mom found her project the day before she turned it in and burned it in the backyard. When Felicity came home that afternoon, my parents took her up to her bedroom, where I heard Felicity crying out every few minutes in what I assume was pain. I said nothing, and from that moment on, neither one of us mentioned Point Pine again. Except for me, right now. I've decided to tell all of you about it. I don't know what is causing me to remember all these things that I had locked up in the deepest parts of my brain. Maybe it's the fact that my father died about a week ago. Since he died, my mom has remained silent, hasn't said a word to anyone. She hasn't even cried. In fact, she ended up sending my father's remains off to God knows where. My money is on Point Pine, although I'd be crazy to ask. I've started recalling random little things about the town that, at the time, seemed like normal everyday things that we as residents were all used to. Now, as I look back, I realize that they're not as normal as I thought back then. One peculiar thing about Point Pine had to do with the Point Pine Bakery. Whenever you went in there, the owner, Mr. Terrence, always knew what you were about to order. I remember the kids having some sort of rumor about Mr. Terrence being a magician who could read minds. Also, whenever you paid for your baked goods, you had to tip Mr. Terrence with an old item of clothing that you had grown out of. There was a giant box up by the register that everyone tossed old baby clothing and shoes into. That was one of the odd things, although you'll come to realize that it won't seem that weird in comparison to some of the other things about Point Pine. Every year on your birthday, you had to get blood work done. I don't think anyone really knew what the point of this was, or if they were actually looking for something. We just all knew that our birthdays would start off with a trip to the Point Pine Labs. Everyone had to be up at 8:13 a.m. There was a system of speakers placed around the town like an amusement park or something, and at 8:13 a.m., without fail, the wailing alarm sound would ricochet through the neighborhoods, waking everybody up. This was followed by parents running to wake up their children and get them out of bed as quickly as possible like the house was on fire or something. Sometimes I expected it to be. All the Point Pine schools were placed in different areas of the town. Point Pine Elementary was towards the east side, Point Pine Middle School was in the west, Point Pine High was in the dead center of town, and Point Pine University was up on a small hill towards the south. If you hadn't noticed by now, every place in town was named Point Pine ______. The Point Pine Cafe, Point Pine Mall, Point Pine Grocery, etc., etc. Certainly, one of the weirdest things by far that took place in Point Pine was the Point Pine Monthly Parade. It happened every month, without fail. It was never on the same date, and each month, a student from Point Pine High was chosen to be in it. The weird thing about this parade was that we weren't allowed to watch it go by. Not out on the streets, not from the windows, and not even on television. That was one of the most enforced rules. You must never, under any circumstance, look at the parade. In fact, for the most part, we weren't even allowed outside when the parade passed through. We always knew when the parade was about to start because it always happened the same way. You would hear a chorus of voices, like a church choir, singing a melody. It wasn't a familiar one that I knew, I was only familiar with it in the sense that I heard it once a month. It sounded like it could be from a nursery rhyme or something similar. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It was like they were coming from the sky, the ground, the trees, the buildings, like everything in Point Pine was singing. Once you heard the first note, you had 5 minutes to get inside a house or a building that had locks on the doors. This might come as a surprise, but in Point Pine, not many buildings contained locks. So, if you happened to be out and about on the street when the singing started, you had about 3 options on the places you could go: one of the schools, the staff break room in the Point Pine bar, or the fridge in the Point Pine pizza shop. One year in the month of August, my friend Lee and I decided that we were going to break the rules and not go inside when the parade passed. Now that I think about it, I'm surprised that kids didn't do this more often, considering that, well, when you tell kids that they must absolutely never do something, they often do that exact thing. Since we didn't know when the parade was coming, where it started, or the exact path that it took around town, we decided the smartest thing to do would be to wait in the forest near the Point Pine Library until the parade eventually came down that street. So, we basically decided to spend about half of the month of August hanging out near or around the library. Around the 3rd week of the month, while we were sitting on the steps of the library talking about some random things that aren't important, we heard the music start. Lee and I looked at each other and then took off running into the trees, while everyone else raced to the nearest school. We went far enough into the forest that someone on the street wouldn't see us, but stayed close enough so that we were still able to see a part of the road. We waited for a while, whispering to each other and then shushing one another as we waited for the infamous parade to pass. This year, my sister's friend Reed was chosen to work on the parade. She was a few years older than my sister, but they were friends because Reed used to live next door to us when we were younger. We were crouching in the bushes and leaves when we heard the chorus of voice getting louder and therefore closer. "Dude, I totally see it." Least. I straightened my back a little bit in my crouched position to try to see what Lee was seeing. I was always a short kid, even now I'm shorter than most guys my age, or any age really, so Lee always pretty much towered over me. "I can't see anything," I hissed, shifting my position. "Shoo. They might hear us." Least. I stopped moving and instead waited for them to get closer, where they were bound to pass right in front of my line of sight. Oh no. Oh crap. Suddenly, Lee dove to the ground, landing in the fetal position, with his head cradled in his hands. "What?" I asked, looking from him to the street. "I saw her. I saw that girl," he exclaimed. "Reed?" I asked, looking over to try to spot her. Lee grabbed me and slammed me down to the ground. "Ow!" I exclaimed. "What was that for?" I asked. "You don't want to look at it," Lee replied. I noticed that for the first time in all of the years that I had known him, Lee looked absolutely terrified. I turned my back on the parade and sat down to look at Lee instead. "What did you see?" I whispered. "Those things, they did something to her. They're eating her, Cody. But she doesn't even care." I looked at Lee, who still had his head in his hands, and he was crying now. I sat with my back to the parade, no longer wanting to see. I heard the singing get louder. "Cody," I heard the voices calling. "Don't look," Lee whispered. "Cody, Cody," now the voice sounded like Reed. "Look at us, Cody." I shut my eyes. The voices went on for a few minutes longer, and at one point, Lee started wailing. I kept my eyes shut the entire time. After that, it moved along and continued its way through town. Once we began to hear everyone come out of their hiding places, I stood up and leaned down to help Lee get up. Once he stood up, he kept his head down. "Lee, what's wrong?" I asked. I could hear him sniffling. "Lee," he finally responded as he lifted his head. It took my eyes. I will never forget the dark, bleeding holes in Lee's face and the cuts around his skin. I threw up in the forest for a good 3 minutes, before I was able to help lead Lee out of the forest. A few adults saw us and got our parents, who came and got us right away. The day after that, my family moved out of Point Pine. I never knew what became of Lee after that day. Minutes after we left, my parents acted like Point Pine never existed. It was never discussed, and I never had the nerve to ask about Lee again. As far as I know, Lee was the only person who ever saw the parade, and he was never able to see anything else after that. I don't know if Point Pine still exists. I'd like to go check it out again, but even if I knew where it was or how to get there, I don't think I'd ever go back. I have a feeling that I wouldn't exactly get a warm welcome. Although, I can't shake the thought that my parents were somehow still connected to the town, even after all those years. Story 10. Instructions for the babysitter. I've only been babysitting for about 6 months now. It was an easy way to make money and it didn't require me to have any real, applicable skills. It was slow going at first, but a couple of months ago I hit the jackpot after a young couple from the rich part of my town asked me to look after their 2 kids one Friday night. They paid me $200 to look after their extremely well-behaved children for 3 hours in a house 5 times the size of mine. It was awesome. The young couple must have also thought that I had done a good job because word spread quickly around the rich neighborhood about the nice, young lady who was willing to look over your children so you could go out for a night of drinking and fun. And when I say that this neighborhood is one of the richest in our state, I am not exaggerating. Most of the people living there are young couples who have come from a long line of wealthy families. Sometimes I'll babysit for a few hours and make a couple $100. Other times the parents want me to stay the night while they go off and get a hotel room so that they could be away from their kids for a change. That is where I make the big bucks. A couple of days ago, a husband and wife texted me asking if I could stay the night at their mansion and watch their 7-year-old little girl for them. I happily agreed. If only I knew what I was in for. When the day finally came, I drove my beat-up Jeep Wrangler to the edge of the rich neighborhood and made my way up this private driveway that I had never noticed before because the entrance was hidden back amongst the trees that surround the entire north side of town. I drove up this steep, winding driveway for what seemed like 10 minutes before I finally saw the house come into view. Out of all the houses I've babysat at, this was hands down the most gorgeous one I've ever seen. It was a huge Victorian-style mansion that was covered in dark brown bricks, making it blend perfectly into the woods surrounding it. I got out of my car and made my way up to the front porch where I knocked on this gigantic, wooden door. A few seconds later, a beautiful woman in her mid-30s answered and introduced herself as Mrs. Collins. She called her husband down, and shortly after, an extremely handsome man also in his 30s came walking down the grand stairway holding an adorable little girl in his arms. The couple seemed very anxious to leave, and even though they were both gorgeous people, I could tell that underneath all of their beauty they were both extremely tired and haggard from having to keep up with their 7-year-old. They were obviously very excited about having an entire night to themselves and couldn't wait to get out of there as fast as they could. Before Mr. and Mrs. Collins left, however, Mrs. Collins handed me several pieces of paper and told me that she had written down a couple of instructions for me to follow throughout the night. She stressed to me how important it was to follow her instructions, and I assured her that I'd give them a look. I waved to the pretty young couple as they made their way down the driveway in their expensive Mercedes and then closed the door behind me. I gave the instructions a quick once-over before folding the papers and stuffing them into my back pocket. I'll look at them later, I told myself. How stupid I was to do that. Mr. and Mrs. Collins' daughter, Samantha, was a very nice, young girl who warmed up to me almost immediately, and we spent the next few hours playing games and watching TV. After we finished our 5th episode of Teen Titans Go, I noticed that it was getting late and asked Samantha what her bedtime was. She shrugged, not really giving me an answer, which is when I remembered Mrs. Collins' instructions. I pulled out the folded pieces of paper and scanned through them very quickly when I saw the words, "Samantha needs to be in bed before 8 p.m. I checked the time to find that it was almost 7:45. "Well, it looks like your bedtime is right now," I said. Lift Samantha up off the couch so I could get her ready. She brushed her teeth and I tucked her into her California king-sized mattress. I told her good night and was leaving her room when she said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Don't forget to lock my door before you leave," she said. I stopped walking and turned back around toward her, confused. "What do you mean, don't forget to lock your door?" I asked. "Why would I need to lock your door? What if you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night?" She looked at me innocently and shrugged her shoulders again. "I don't know, but Mommy always locks my door before I go to sleep. She says she does it to protect me and herself. I don't remember what happens after I fall asleep, but Mommy says that I always try to leave my room at night, which is a bad thing." I looked at her dumbfounded. I didn't know what to say. "Mommy told me that she would leave instructions for you to follow, and locking my door is one of them," she said. "Oh, okay Samantha, I'll lock your door." Good night, sweetheart," I stammered. She gave me a big smile and rolled over in her bed. I closed her door and noticed that there was a latch drilled into the door frame that would allow someone to lock it from the outside. I closed the latch and then walked back downstairs so I could read the rest of Mrs. Collins' instructions. When I had first seen the pieces of paper, I was under the impression that they were just instructions that told me what shows Samantha is not allowed to watch, or how to operate the surround sound. After I started reading them, though, I realized that I was wrong. I was completely and utterly wrong. "Hello, and I'm so glad that you agreed to stay the night and babysit Samantha for us. She is such an angel, and I am sure that the both of you will get along very well. I know that our house might seem old and scary, but don't worry, because nothing bad will happen to you as long as you follow some simple instructions. 1. Firstly, Samantha needs to be in bed in her room with the door locked before 8 p.m. Do not open up her bedroom door after 8 p.m. I repeat, do not open Samantha's bedroom door after 8 p.m. She will try to convince you to open the door in many different ways. She will cry, scream, and threaten you until you give in, but do not listen to her. She can't hurt you as long as the door is closed. 2. Between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m. make sure you remain in the living room with the lights turned on. Around this time of night you may hear scratching and growling coming from Samantha's room or from other parts of the house. These noises are nothing to worry about as long as you stay in the living room. Watch some TV to pass the time. We have a lot of movies to choose from. Winky face. 3. After 9:30 do not venture into any dark areas of the house. I would recommend that you turn on as many lights as you can before 9:30 so that you don't accidentally trap yourself. You might begin to see things hiding in the dark areas of the house from time to time, and sometimes they will even try to talk to you. Just ignore them and they'll eventually ignore you as well. You might also happen to see a pair of yellow cat eyes looking at you through the darkness every once in a while. Do not stare at them for more than 30 seconds. 4. At around 10 p.m. it might begin to sound like there are several people walking around in the basement downstairs. Do not worry because as long as you stay out of the basement they cannot get to you. I know it sounds unlikely, but around this time you will begin to feel an overwhelming urge to walk down into the basement. If this happens, go into the kitchen and drink a cold glass of milk. This usually helps. The urge will most likely pass after about 10 minutes, but if the urge is still there after 10 minutes and you don't think that you will be able to stop yourself from walking into the basement, then call either me or Mr. Collins and we'll tell you what to do. 5. When 10:30 comes around you will begin to hear something running back and forth in the hallway upstairs. Stay on the first floor of the house during this time. Don't worry about Samantha. As long as you lock her door beforehand, he won't be able to get to her. If you start to hear him making his way down the stairs, then lock yourself in the first floor bathroom with the lights on. He will knock on the bathroom door repeatedly and will try impersonating someone close to you like your mom or your dad in order to trick you into opening the bathroom door for him. He is really good at it. No matter what he says to you and no matter who he sounds like, do not open the door. He should go away after 5 minutes. Check under the door to make sure that he is no longer there before you open it. 6. Now this next part is very important. You will be sleeping in our guest room upstairs for the night. Before you go to bed, make sure that you leave a plate outside your bedroom door with a piece of raw steak on it. You can find the raw steak in our refrigerator, and leave a glass of milk next to the plate as well. On a piece of paper, write the words, Park Aunt Mihi, in red ink and leave it on the plate with the raw meat. Also, at some point during the night you might wake up and notice that there is something standing in the corner of your room. Please refrain from looking at the figure as much as you can. I'd recommend wearing earbuds so that you won't hear it muttering to itself. And that's about it. There are also a few other general rules that you should follow throughout the night just to make sure that nothing bad happens. Rule 1. If the house phone rings at any point during the night, don't answer it no matter how long or how loud it might ring. Mr. Collins and I will call your cell phone if we need to talk with you. Rule 2. If you feel something tap you on the shoulder at any point during the night, don't turn around and wait at least 30 seconds before moving again. Rule 3. Don't eat meat after 8 o'clock. They might see it as a threat and will most likely attack you. Thanks again, Annie. If you have any trouble or questions, feel free to call me or my husband at any point during the night. If you do call us and a man with a very deep voice answers the phone, hang up immediately and try calling us again. P.S. Throughout the night you might hear a dog whimpering from somewhere off inside the house. We don't have a dog, so don't go looking for it. I hadn't realized what I had gotten myself into. It is currently 8:31 p.m. as I am writing this, and the growling noises just started. It sounds like they're coming from every room in the fucking house. I thought that Samantha's screams from a couple minutes ago were going to be the worst part, but now I can hear her muffled growls from upstairs, and I can assure you that this is worse. This is so much worse. Story 11. Drive safe. My ex always hated our dog, but he probably would have taken her too if she weren't so ugly. If Lulu were one of those cute mini golden doodles or corgis, or even one of those goofy-looking dogs that are charming in their ugliness, think Danny DeVito or Steve Buscemi, only in dog version, then I have no doubt he would have claimed ownership of her too, along with everything else in our apartment. But Lulu is just a plain old ugly dog, and for that and so much else about her, I'm forever grateful. I don't want to talk about my ex too much here, because this isn't about him, but I do need to explain why I was traveling across the country in the middle of the night with my few worldly possessions loaded up in the back of a bumpy U-Haul van. My ex and I had been together 6 years, never married. He said marriage was outdated. I said fine. Was I upset by that? Yes and no. But I kept quiet. I loved him. 5 months ago he told me he wants to split up. He said it just like that. I want to split up. No shaking of the hands, no tears in his eyes. Not even a change in the tone of his voice. I was in the kitchen when it happened, eating honey bunches of oats for breakfast. He was standing in the hall. I want to split up, he said, and then he grabbed his bag and left for work, leaving me to sob as my cereal got soggy in the bowl. Lulu heard me crying and nuzzled her snout in my lap. She whimpered along with me as the hours went by. I skipped work that day, sat on the couch and watched the sunlight pass over the walls of the apartment I'd always thought of as our home together. The thing is, my ex made way more money than me. He was happy to cover the bulk of the rent, he'd said. Happy to buy the furniture. Happy to lease the new car for us. Happy to pay for this and that, loading up our apartment with nice things. When the time came for me to move all the things that were actually mine out of the place, I realized I had even less than I did 6 years ago. It all barely filled the U-Haul van. I didn't have a couch or chairs, those were his on paper. I didn't have any dishes or silverware, we'd thrown out my old ones when he'd bought a fancy new set a couple years ago. I didn't even have a mattress, he'd gotten us an expensive memory foam king size. I remember I'd always wanted to let Lulu hop up on that bed to snuggle while we watched movies in our room. My ex wouldn't hear of it. Stop treating the dog like it's a person, he'd said. She's lucky she gets to even live inside the apartment with us. I was the one who got Lulu from the pound, back when she was a puppy. She's a street dog, or she was, until the people from animal control swept her up one day as she'd been rummaging through an overturned trash can. You can tell she's got a good amount of pit bull in her, but beyond that she's an all-American mutt with a big boulder of a head, a weirdly thin body and stumpy legs. She waddles more than walks, and she snores like crazy, but she's a total sweetheart. When she sees kids, she lies on her belly and waits until they get close before she gives them kisses. We didn't even train her to do that. One afternoon about a year or so ago, Lulu came up behind my ex and licked his ankles, and he turned and gave her a small kick right in the head. It wasn't enough to hurt Lulu, but that was when I should have known. Looking back, it's amazing how much you can convince yourself someone is who they're not. So the U-Haul was packed, I'd quit my hourly job, and I was now on the road toward my sister's place in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where I'd been promised a place to stay for the time being. It was a 10-plus hour drive. Just Lulu and me in the front of the van as we rumbled through the endless pastoral of farmland and cow towns. I'd purposefully decided to take the smaller highway to avoid traffic, since I was still uncomfortable driving the U-Haul, and the scenery made me glad I did. Tall fast food signs rose up into the sky like totem poles against clouds so big and white they almost made you want to cry. But I'd promised myself I was done crying. Or at least until I'd gotten off the road. I'd had to pack the U-Haul by myself, so it had already been early afternoon by the time I set off. After about 4 hours on the road, the sky began to dim over the highway. Just as the sun sunk beneath the ridges of the mountains in the distance, I heard a loud clang somewhere below my feet. All at once, the U-Haul van started shaking. It felt like the wheel was fighting against me. I kept having to grip it and yank it back straight. I had trouble looking out the back window because my stuff was piled up, but I managed to get over to an exit that was just ahead. As I slowed the van down now that I was off the highway, I saw a sign sticking out from the roadway. Richard & Sons Auto Repair. A quarter-mile ahead. I know you've probably heard a story like this before. A story where a car breaks down in the middle of nowhere on a backroads highway, a young woman by herself. Maybe she meets a creepy guy in overalls who says something like, "Oh, you must be lost, little missy," as he eyes her like she's a good meal he's about to devour. But it really wasn't like that. "Evening, ma'am," said the perfectly normal-looking guy inside the auto repair shop. "How can I help you?" "Oh, and who's this cutie?" he added, taking notice of Lulu at my side. The shop's owner was a man named Richard Meadows, and he was a pleasant, polite, and well-dressed older gentleman, his gray hair neatly combed and his buttoned shirt starched bright white. He ran to the place with his 2 sons, both of whom were waiting in the garage. "My sons Abel and Dean will run diagnostics, then you and I can head into the office to call the U-Haul folks," Richard said as we walked up to them. "Don't want this to be on your tab after all." "Abel want to take the keys?" I handed the keys to the son named Abel, who was a little chubby and pale, his shaved head dotted with moles. He seemed shy and only nodded when he took the keys from me. I only mention Abel's appearance because the other son beside him, Dean, was almost shockingly handsome. He had a thick head of sandy blonde hair, a chiseled jawline, and broad shoulders under his denim work shirt. He was that level of teen movie heartthrob handsome that made my face suddenly hot. Walking with me out to the U-Haul in the lot, Dean took out a clipboard, licking the tip of his pen as he angled it downward. "So the truck just started rattling on you?" he asked. I stuttered through what had happened, feeling like a nervous high school girl again, but he just smiled and nodded the whole time, his voice calm like a doctor at a bedside. Well, I'm sure we'll figure it out. And like my dad said, don't worry. We'll make sure the U-Haul folks pay up, not you." I thanked him, trying to ignore the fact that I was blushing for no reason. "Good thing you've got a bodyguard here with you," Dean added, smiling down at Lulu. "What's his name?" "Her," I said. "And her name is Lulu." "Well, hi there, Lulu." When he reached down to pet her, Lulu stepped back and showed her teeth, growling under her breath. "Lulu," I said. "Bad girl." Dean just laughed. "Nah, she's cool, just protecting her mom, right, Lulu? Honestly, I wouldn't trust some random auto repair dude either." "No, it's not you. It's just my boyfriend, or I guess my ex-boyfriend now. I don't know. I guess he made her a little skittish around guys like you." Dean raised his eyebrows a little, but then he pursed his lips and nodded as if he understood, and I appreciated that he didn't ask anything further about it. He told me to go wait on him, that he'd handle everything from here. When I got back to the office, Dean's father Richard had already sorted out the bill with the U-Haul folks. "Free and clear," he said. There was nothing else to do but wait for the van to be ready. A TV hanging in the corner was playing a muted episode of Judge Judy. Richard took a seat across from me in the waiting area and petted Lulu while telling me a little about himself and his family. His wife had died a year and a half ago, he said. Passed suddenly in her sleep, which is a mercy, I suppose. It had been a tough string of months, but he and his sons were close. They were getting him through it. Lulu seemed to sense his sadness, because she showed more attachment to him than most other male strangers. "I hope you don't mind me speaking out of turn," Richard said as he stroked Lulu's head, "but I'm relieved you have this dog here with you." "Why is that?" "Well, not to scare you, but there've been some incidents." He told me he didn't want me to cause any undue worry, but there had been 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields down the highway over the past year and a half. "All the victims were like you, young women, traveling alone," Richard said. "So it's good you got this girl here," and he put his face close to Lulu, who licked him on the cheek. "Ah, good girl. Such a sweetie." "I mean, I appreciate you giving me a heads up, at least," I said. "Sure, and like I said, didn't mean to scare you." "Probably nothing." "No, it's nice of you. You guys have all been really nice," I added. He was very helpful. "That's just the wonderful service and dedication you would expect from the world-famous team at Richard & Sons Auto Repair." Richard laughed. "But I do thank you, sincerely." I almost asked if Dean had a girlfriend, as if that weren't a totally crazy and pathetic question to pose to a total stranger, but before I had the chance to embarrass myself, the other son, Abel, shuffled into the office and murmured something to his father. Richard nodded, saying to me, "Well, looks like you're all set." "No paperwork or anything?" "Nope, all taken care of. Get you a receipt for insurance purposes, but otherwise you're good to go. Here, let me walk you and Lulu out." On our way out of the office, I debated the merits of giving Dean my number, trying to balance the pros and cons. Was it better to risk wild embarrassment if I get rejected, versus the regret I might feel if I did nothing? I was so new to the single life again that I didn't know how any of this worked anymore. It turns out the decision was made for me, because Dean was gone when we got to the van. "Dean head off already?" Richard asked. Abel nodded. "Had a date," he said in that whisper-quiet voice of his. "Oh, another date? Why am I not surprised?" Of course, I thought. And really, what did I expect? Just because Dean was working at some Nowheresville auto repair shop didn't change the fact that he was still wildly handsome and easy to talk to. If anything, Girls probably swooned over the fact that he could take a car apart by hand, peeling off his shirt afterward, his muscles gleaming with sweat, etc., etc. I felt like an idiot. "Well, sure, it was great to meet you," Richard said, "and so nice to meet you too, Miss Lulu." His son Abel reached into his pocket and dangled the keys out in front of me, while Richard got down and gave Lulu one last head scratch. I took the keys from Abel and smiled. "Thank you," I said. He smiled back, but he didn't break eye contact, and for a split second a shudder passed through my body, something I can't explain. "Drive safe," he breathed. The backroad highway that night was dark, what my sister would call country dark, but what I would call horror movie dark. It seemed the smaller highways like this were only busy during the day, because I only saw a car pass by every few minutes or so. Fields of corn along the roadside swayed under a cloud-choked moon. The night air was punctuated by faraway train whistles, which sounded to me more like muffled screams. I don't know if I was just freaked out by the warning Richard had given me, or if there really was something to be said about this stretch of highway, but I kept getting a feeling as if eyes were staring out at me from the fields. I sensed I was driving into the mouth of a beast, already on my way to being digested by the darkness. Up ahead, the cornfields ended and were overtaken by forest, a dense swath of evergreen trees, and the moment we drove past the fields, Lulu started barking. I swear I almost crashed the car. "Oh my God, Lulu." Lulu calmed down. She was going crazy, turning her head side to side as she barked back at whatever we just passed on the side of the road. "Lulu, relax, girl." But I couldn't even say that without my own voice choking up. 7 women found dead in the woods beyond the cornfields, Richard had said. My hands felt slippery on the wheel. I'd never been comfortable driving a U-Haul van before, and it didn't help that the darkness seemed to devour the headlamps, so that I could barely see a few feet in front of me down the highway. I tried turning on the radio, got static, and turned the dial, but then thought the better of it and shut it off again. Better to be in silence, just in case. In case what? My mind was going in so many directions. And even saying there was silence would be wrong, because every few minutes Lulu started up again, pawing at the back seat and the windows, barking like crazy and growling. It was like she was fighting a ghost and wanted to break out of the car. I glanced out the windows but could only see darkness on either side of the road, that, along with the shadowed outlines of trees, stumps, power lines, all of which looked like monsters to me. Eventually we entered South Carolina. We passed out of the rural area, and it was only when the bright flood lamps of passing car dealerships and 24-hour fast food places illuminated the inside of the cabin that Lulu fell silent. But even then, for the last 3 hours of the car ride, she never fully relaxed. Especially when we passed through the occasional pockets of empty rural areas, she seemed stressed. Occasionally she'd perk up as if she'd seen someone outside our window, floating along with us. Her body language would stiffen. By now I just let it happen. I told myself she was just tense from traveling. She seemed desperate by the end of the trip. I could tell she was exhausted. She hadn't slept all night. I was exhausted too. Lulu's howls and barks had kept me alert, but it hadn't exactly done well for keeping my eyes on the road. I felt the kind of twitchy panic that usually came from drinking too much coffee, my eyes darting from side to side, feeling like I was about to crash into something any minute. My sister had texted me before she went to bed and told me the key was under the mat. It was around 3 a.m. when I pulled up to the curb outside her house and put the van in park. When I did, Lulu shot up. "Okay, yes, we're here, girl. You can relax now." In the glow of the van's cab, as I reached over to grab my night bag, I could hear Lulu breathing deeply. She was taking fast and muffled breaths, panting. It sounded like she was trying to catch her breath after running. "Hey, chill out," I said as I grabbed my bag and sat up again. "What are you panting for, girl? We're all ready." I froze. Lulu was totally still beside me. She was facing the back of the van. Her mouth was closed. Her tongue wasn't hanging out, her chest wasn't rising and falling. She was calm and focused, breathing slowly and silently. It wasn't her. The breathing wasn't her. It was coming from somewhere in the back of the van. Just then, Lulu showed her teeth and growled. "Oh, okay, girl," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. I was shaking. I could barely feel my body. I was floating outside of it. Let's head on inside now, come on. I fumbled with the door handle. I almost fell when I stepped out. I tried taking out my phone and dialing 911, but my hand was shaking so bad I couldn't even unlock my home screen. Lulu hopped out and circled me. She was on high alert. Her head was low and she moved like a predator, keeping close to my legs. I walked backwards with her up the driveway, but she stayed between me and the van, pacing quickly from side to side. I managed to get my phone unlocked. I was about to hit the emergency call button when I heard something move inside the van, a metallic click. The back door, I realized. I'd locked it, but it could still open from the inside. The street was dark, only one lamppost glowing off at the intersection down the road. Everyone in their homes were asleep. I was totally alone. In the darkness, I heard something scrape at the back door from inside the van. Then a soft clunk as the door opened. It opened slowly at first, as if a creature inside were checking to see if it were safe. I hit the emergency call button just as the door swung all the way open. 911, what's your emergency? 911, what's your emergency? But I couldn't speak. I was frozen. The door bounced back as it fully opened, and then out fell a naked body, tangled limbs hitting the pavement, a mess of blonde hair shimmering in the dark. When the person rose up again, I almost passed out. It was Dean. Hello? Hello? I said into the phone. I need help. Someone, he was in my van. Please send police to... Lulu barked and jumped forward. Jesus fucking Christ, Dean said, shaking out his limbs. Can someone please tell this fucking dog to shut up? Dean was covered in sweat, wearing only his boxer shorts. He looked sickly and diseased. All fucking night it's just bark bark bark, yap yap yap. He exhaled and stretched out his arms, and I saw he was holding a knife in his hand. With his free hand, he swiped back the sweaty hair off his forehead. Cooped up in a hot-ass truck for hours under all your useless shit, had to take off my clothes, it was so damn hot, and I gotta hear that fucking dog barking nonstop? Please send help. I said into the phone, repeating my sister's address over and over. Please, he's got a knife. Oh, he's got a knife, does he? Oh, boo-hoo, and Dean walked forward, holding the knife out toward Lulu, tossing it casually from hand to hand. Every time I try to make a move, this bitch goes nuts on me. Yap yap. Please just, I don't know what you want, but please. You should be thanking me, you know that? He waved the knife from side to side, as if reprimanding me. I'm way out of your league, so the fact that I chose you tonight, it's really an act of charity. Okay, I said. I would have said anything to get him to go away. Okay, I'm sorry. You want the truth? It wasn't even me who wanted you. I thought you were a 6, maybe a 7 at best. But my brother? He thought you looked tasty enough. So I say, if I... Sure, I'll get you and bring you back to him. I'm a good brother, aren't I? That's what good brothers do. They do favors. I wanted his first time to be special. No, I know, you're a good brother. I still held the phone up to my ear, hoping the operator could hear me. This all could have been so easy. So fucking easy. Would have been over by now. But no, because Miss Yap 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 over here. He gripped the knife tight, squatting as he stepped forward, his eyes on Lulu. So keep on crying into the phone, but make sure you tell them your dog is dead too, because the bitch deserved it. No. Dean lunged forward, slashing the knife at her. Lulu yelped and flipped to the side as the blade swept across her back, her body scrambling over the pavement, but then it was Dean who screamed, falling back as his knife landed on the ground. Fuck. Jesus Christ. My hand. Even in the darkness I could see the blood pour from Lulu's back where the blade had sliced her open, but I could also see her spit out a mangled hand onto the pavement, as if it were nothing but a squeaky toy. I'm gonna kill this dog. Dean screamed. Blood poured from the stump at his wrist. With his other hand he reached down to grab the knife, then turned to face her. But Lulu was already upon him, lunging up in the air, her own blood streaking off the gash in her back as she flew. This time she aimed for his face. A severed hand, it turns out, is a more than adequate DNA sample. It only took a few days before the police were able to match Dean's DNA with the DNA found on the bodies of the 7 women who were found in the woods down the highway from the auto repair shop. Dean's mugshot showed a guy with a mutilated, torn-up face, bruised and bloody and held together with stitches. When the police had arrived that night outside my sister's house, they had found him half dead on the sidewalk, blood leaking from his neck. As for Lulu and me, I had already carried her inside the house. The police found us on the tile floor of the kitchen, Lulu bleeding out in my lap, unmoving, while I whispered to her, "I love you, girl. I love you so much." It wasn't long before Dean's brother Abel was arrested as an accessory to the crimes. During a news conference a few days later, the police chief said that for the past year and a half, the 2 brothers had been using road traps on the backroad highway to cause damage to passing vehicles, forcing them to stop. In most cases, they fixed the cars and that was that, nothing more than a scam to gain business for their father's shop. But when the driver was a pretty young woman, the 2 used the shop's tow truck to lure the women away to a remote location past the cornfields. DNA samples from at least 4 of the women were found inside the truck. With the last would-be victim, the brothers appeared to have gotten reckless and instead lured her right to the repair shop, said the police chief during the press conference. Had the young women not been accompanied by her dog, a pit bull mix by the name of Lulu, there's no telling what. I closed my laptop. I didn't want to hear the rest. Later, I saw in an online article a photo of their father Richard shielding his face as reporters surrounded him. There was no evidence he'd been involved in any way. He'd seemed shocked when the police came to the auto shop. I felt bad for him. He seemed like a good man. I couldn't even imagine what he was thinking. The police chief had said the brothers had been committing the assaults and murders for the last year and a half, which means they would have started right after their mother died. The timing made me feel sick. Richard had said his wife's death was from natural causes, that she'd died peacefully in her sleep. I like to believe that's the case. I like to believe the brothers had waited for their mother to die, and that's the only reason they started their murderous spree right after her funeral. Despite all they did, I really hope, if only for Richard's sake, that they hadn't gotten impatient and done something to their own mother. It was surreal trying to get settled in a new place after all this. I felt like my old life had been years and years ago. My ex did text me once, though, just after he heard the news. "Hope you're okay," the text said. Normally I would have sat for hours, deliberating over how to respond. But now I texted back right away. "I am," I said. I watched 3 dots pop up in the bubble as he was typing something, then they disappeared again. That night, the news ran a segment about Lulu. There was a whole ceremony in her honor. Normally I wouldn't have watched the rest of the coverage of the case. It was already traumatic enough. I was told I would have to testify, that it would be a long process, and I wanted to avoid it as much as I could. But I made sure to watch the news segment on Lulu. A moment of celebration today as Lulu the scrappy pit bull mix gets a hero's welcome outside the Eastside Animal Hospital, said the news anchor. So many people had shown up to the animal hospital earlier that afternoon to celebrate Lulu's discharge. The footage held on Lulu's face as she eyed the crowd of police officers, the news crews, the reporters and hospital staff. I was right beside her in the footage, looking just as awkward. "See that girl?" I said as I watched the coverage with her later that night. Lulu was curled on my lap on the couch as I stroked the long scar on her back, the jagged ridges where the animal doctors had sewn her up again. "That's you and me on the news, see girl?" Lulu had been sleeping, and now she lifted up her head, drowsy from the commotion of the day. She didn't seem too interested about her 15 minutes of fame. She just sighed and plopped her head right back down again on my stomach, and went back to sleep. When the news was over, I nudged Lulu awake, and after she went outside to pee, the 2 of us shuffled down the hall. I led Lulu into the guest bedroom. As I pulled down the covers on the bed, Lulu went to lie down on the hardwood floor in the corner of the room, by herself. No, come here, girl." She glanced up at me, one paw on top of the other. I patted the bed. "You sleep up here from now on. Come on up." She made a soft noise, her tail wagging. Then she hopped up awkwardly on the bed, still a little sore from her wounds. As I shut off the lamp, Lulu nuzzled up against my legs, resting her head on my thigh. "Comfy?" I asked. She sighed a grumbly, growling purr in response. Get used to it, pretty girl, I said. You've more than earned it.